how have you managed like the volatility of having like, you hit a 30K month and you think
On
that's the
top
new
of it all.
normal. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then 2 months later, you're below 10K. And you're like, oh, what do I do
Yeah,
now?
I'll be honest, man. I growing up, like I never had any money, so having some money was wild for me. For a little while, there was definitely a roller coaster of like blowing it all, that month, and then next month when I was managing a team at Geico, um, I told them if you're not using your pattern recognition to sell more, you're cutting yourself short of one of the best tools you have because you can figure out what people value based on who they are. And you can present your offer, in that case, it was car insurance, based on what they value, right? You don't just pitch everybody the
Hey, I'm
same.
curious what your understanding of or what experience you've had with energy.
Energy's huge. Like there's so many examples I can give you. In a sales space, like on a sales call, energy is critical.
Why do you think that is in the sales space that you see the people wanting to buy that thing or spend the money right away?
Man, there's a glorification of people that buy the, Lambos and the, pay for the yachts and do all that. So I think that's part of it is trying to live up to a specific lifestyle. The other piece, though, realistically, is that nobody's taught how to use money. Really, nobody. And the majority of the population is forced to be at least somewhat responsible because they have to live paycheck to paycheck. And it's always the same amount, but it's going to be at certain intervals, right? It just is what it is. But salespeople have an impactful piece of any conversation is the authenticity. We have these receptors as human beings to figure out when something's inauthentic. It just feels off. It feels fake. Right? But the biggest thing is stories to me. Stories are little hypnosis sessions. And when you can use stories in your sales process, tell them the right way, they are more powerful than any other aspect of your sales flow because those stories deal with all the future objections, the worry about will it work for me? Do they know what they're talking about? All those things are totally eliminated when you tell the right story and you do it effectively. So for me, that's definitely one of those big factors.
Andy Strom, or I guess I see Andrew on the Zoom here. How are you?
Yeah, everybody calls me Andy, but yeah, I'm doing great, man. Appreciate it. How you doing?
Yeah, you got a big old smile on your face, so you seem like you're doing great. Did you go by Andy on Twitter back in the day?
Absolutely, but my handle has always been Andrew, so it's confusing.
Interesting. Well,
Yeah,
sweet man, you're one of the first guys that I came across in the high ticket sales space that was like authentic. I know I had a call with you back when I was first getting into the space, and I don't know if you remember, but I was telling you how good I was at doing the discovery call and getting people set on the closing call, and then and you asked me how many I'd closed afterwards. I'm like, well, I haven't closed any yet. And you're like, well, yeah, that's what we would work on. And I was just like, it's just so funny looking back at it now, thinking that like I'm good at doing the triage calls, so I pretty much
yeah.
know everything. So, what have you been up to since then? I've seen you like all over the place, so many testimonials and things like that.
Yeah, all kinds of stuff. So I've helped manage some sales teams. I've done some spot closing here and there myself and enjoy keeping the axe sharp that way. Um, Done a lot of consulting and helping, guys on Twitter and off Twitter improve their sales and sales systems.
It seems like the there's this path that like I guess you started in corporate, right?
I
Corporate
did.
sales.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So in the high ticket space, I've noticed this path of like setter to closer to sales manager to consultant. And that it seems to be like the common, and then maybe you own your own offer from there. But that seems like the common pattern I've seen pretty much everybody do. So how long ago did you leave corporate?
Yeah, it's super common. I worked for Geico for 15 years and I left, man, it was right around the COVID chaos. So just after COVID, I worked from home for a year. So the end of 2020, I would say, probably November 2020, I ditched the corporate, golden handcuffs.
Amazing. Was there a catalyst for you that caused you to leave then?
Yeah, there was. there were a couple things that happened for me. Actually, there was three specific things, and they all combined into like this big push, and I needed it at the time. I was horrible at getting out of my comfort zone, and
Mm,
sometimes God says, "Hey, you're not listening, so I'm just gonna make sure you listen this time." So, the first thing that happened was I was told in no uncertain terms that I wouldn't be promoted locally and that I would have to move to Iowa if I ever wanted a promotion, because of the things I could not change about myself. If I was something else, I could be promoted locally. If I wanted a promotion otherwise, I had to move. And it would be basically a flat promotion in terms of income, but I'd have to move my whole family from Florida to Iowa. And I was like, I'm not doing that. So so that was kind of a big roadblock. Then my wife was sick and I was needing to take time off to make sure she was taken care of. And corporate rules are corporate rules. So you run out of time and they get really upset about that. So that was kind of a secondary thing that I was running into. And then actually I was starting to have some health problems personally that I don't know what the cause was, but when I would walk into the building, I would break out in hives. Like my physical body was manifesting the rejection of that job. And it wouldn't happen anywhere else, nowhere else.
wow.
So I just realized, man, like there's just so many things going on, and I can absolutely work for myself. And I had already started doing some coaching and consulting on the side and realized, if I go all in on that, I will be just fine. So that's what I did.
Incredible. The breaking out in hives when you walk into the building is so
Yeah.
interesting. What do you think, if you had to guess, like what was behind that? Or why did that
You
happen?
know, I have a couple theories. Like one is just the very simple like environmental, right? Like maybe they used some kind of cleaning product at the end of COVID that I just reacted to. Who knows? But more realistically, I think it was just like my body rejecting the stress of being there because mentally I understood like if I keep coming back to this, this is going to be my reality for the next 20 or 30 years. And that terrified me. Like I didn't want that. No part of me wanted that. And I realized like if I don't make a change, this is my destiny. And an interesting thing like about the building where I worked, they had a little table set up at the entryway. And whenever somebody that worked there died, they would put their picture on that table and a single like flower next to it. And I literally started picturing myself on that picture like every time I walked in and was like, dude, I can't do that. I can't be that. So that like it was just, yeah, it was overwhelming for me. I just couldn't stay.
Wow. That really resonates with me because I quit. I was an air traffic controller for the government. Similar thing. I looked at the guys who were 20 years ahead of me and their eyes were glazed over. And I was like, there's no way I can do this for this long. Like I already don't like it. And I've seen people who are counting down like the year, it would be like 3 years out, but they'd be counting down how many days they had left or how many shifts they had to work for the government. And I was just like, this doesn't make any sense. Like you guys know you can just leave, right? Or like what if you just left? And so I did, and I when I put in my resignation letter, like people's minds were blown. They're like, there's no way you can give up a six-figure job for, you know, figuring it out on your own. So
Yeah.
that's super cool. And so from quitting corporate, did you have like a lot of savings or were you like back against the wall, like I need to make money right away?
Not a lot, honestly. I had some, but not a lot. And I kind of had a window. I was like, I got 6 months run out to figure this out, right? And I either have to be making enough money in 6 months to make it work, or I have to go back to corporate somewhere, just not there. You know what I mean? And there's that safety net in the back of my mind, but I knew, I did not want to go back there. So, and what's crazy is, within a couple months, I was making more money at my new position working for myself than at my old position working for someone else.
Yeah, it's incredible how fearful that jump can be. And then when you finally make it, yeah, you wish you would have done it so much sooner. So,
Yeah.
how long did you sit thinking about I want to quit or I'm gonna quit before you actually did?
there was probably a 3 month run up where my income was ramping up outside of the corporate space. And I started realizing like, okay, I'm actually able to do this. What would the timing look like? Like, how would I actually make that decision? When could I really do that? And I started behaving differently at work, which I thought was funny. And it just became super obvious to everyone around me. I just didn't care. But the wild thing was, as soon as I did that, I started getting called into meetings, 2 levels above my management level, and they would ask me questions because they knew I just wasn't going to blow smoke. I was just going to tell them the truth, and I was actually decently insightful. So it was interesting. But yeah, it was about a 3 month window, and then it just kind of all, like I said, culminated in that decision to say, yeah, that's it, man. I'm gonna go ahead and pull the ripcord.
Okay. It sounds like you were already building a brand and a business or a side hustle or whatever you wanted to call it at the time.
Yep.
Okay. And was everything from Twitter?
Yeah, at the time it was 100% Twitter based. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
that was like, what year was that? 2020?
Uh, yeah, end of 2020. Yep.
So it was like the glory days of money Twitter when it was a
Was.
lot less
Yeah.
crowded, and I'm sure we grew up with a lot of the same influences of
Yeah.
people, and there's way less people making content and things like that. So that's super cool. Was the reason that you weren't going to get promoted locally because you were a white male?
Yes. Correct.
I assumed just on how you said that and how you kind of stepped around it. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I was told indirectly that was the case. And then I was walked through a management seminar where I was told very directly that that was the case. So,
Oof. Oof.
yeah.
That reminds me of Scott Adams had a book, How to Fail at Anything and Win Big. Did you read that?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Exact story that's in there of him talking about that. So that's so interesting. Cool. Um, so now that you have quit, there's two things that I think make entrepreneurship a little bit more challenging than working in at a corporate role or with the government or whatever. One is health insurance, and the other is stability. Like sometimes you'll have a 30K month and then you have an 8K month or something like that. And you have to deal with and manage those expectations. So I
Yes.
guess we'll start with the health insurance. Have you just, I mean, you just live a healthy life and don't get sick and then you don't need to use it. But then you mentioned that you and your wife both had some
Kind
issues.
of my primary goal, but yeah, it's not really possible. But there's all kinds of stuff, man. I just kind of currently went with the cheapest kind of basic option I could find for the family. But a lot of people successfully use like health shares. Like there's a Christian one that I've seen quite a bit, but you basically pay a certain monthly amount. You pay out of pocket for your medical expenses, and then you submit a request to be reimbursed, right? And just about everything is reimbursable as long as it's a medical related expense. And those tend to be way more affordable than traditional insurance. And especially for single guys, young guys, that stuff is a home run because it's really catastrophic coverage in the end that they need. It's not the day-to-day doctor's appointments and stuff that really matters. So something like that could be a really good option.
Interesting. It sounds like there's one called Crowd Health that I've looked into a little
Yeah,
bit. It's
it's
been recommended. Is it similar to
similar,
that?
yeah, similar setup, exactly.
Okay. Cool. So you'll see when you're healthy, you'll get an email or something that says, "Hey, somebody else needs some support. Will you donate or will you contribute or something like that?"
Very similar, but this is almost like managed for you. But you do get a letter that says like, hey, these are the expenses. Do you object to any of these
I see.
medical expenses, something like that. But you think about it like self-insuring, but doing it as a group, and
Yes.
it makes a lot of sense.
Cool. Okay. And then what have you done or how have you managed like the volatility of having like, you hit a 30K month and you think
The
that's the new
top of the world.
normal. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then 2 months later, you're below 10K and you're like, oh, what do I do
Yeah,
now?
I'll be honest, man. I growing up, like I never had any money, so having some money was wild for me. For a little while, there was definitely a roller coaster of like blowing it all, that month, and then next month being tight and thinking like, what have I done? And I had a whole bunch of like random debt to take care of coming out of the back of the corporate side. So initially, a lot of that just went straight to like cleaning up that debt, right? But a few things that really helped me. One was Nate Dean, who's on Twitter as Chronicles of Nate, I believe. But he shared something with me that was really powerful, and it was essentially operating your expenses like you're a business. And what you're doing is depositing all of your income into a single account, withdrawing a specific amount every month to cover the specific expenses you designate. And then you basically have a discretionary amount that's kind of a window. You can choose to use that or not, but everything above that stays in the account. And that account obviously starts to grow and can become very significant. You can leverage that cash to create, income through purchasing assets, life insurance, which is a great option for people if they understand the infinite banking concept. But yeah, it's a really cool idea because what it does is it forces you to live as if you're getting consistent income, but you're obviously going to have the peaks and valleys throughout the year. It really does, though, help smooth out that experience throughout the year, and it removes a lot of the stress that comes. You just have to really be clear when you have those 30K months, which you can have, that, this is not my new normal. I'm preparing for that, winter season, and I need to make sure I'm putting some money aside because the winter season comes.
Yeah. As much as we'd like to say that it won't or that this is the new normal,
Yeah.
it's you better prepare for it. Yeah, especially
Yep.
if you're like commission only or if you're only
Exactly.
there's no base or anything like that. So this method that you're talking about is not just about insurance. It's also like holistically, it's like put all the money into an account and pay yourself first, and then you have the extra
Yeah.
money to invest. And then
You
also
can
if
think
you want
about
to
it.
look at insurance, then you
Yeah,
can.
you can think about it like having three accounts. Your primary account where all the money gets put in. Then your bills account where a specific amount goes every single month to cover your specific expenses. Those can be on auto pay, and those are your home, your car, your health insurance, all those pieces, right? And then a little bit goes into kind of your spending account, and that you can use on whatever you want that month. But then that main account, that grows, right? And you're disciplined to only use those other two accounts for the other things.
I see. There's a huge benefit, I think, to when you can only touch a certain amount of your money instead of seeing the whole thing.
Yeah.
Like for
Yeah.
me, it was like saving in Bitcoin was like I put money in, but I can't take it out. And then that
Yeah.
just allowed it to me to like, oh, of course I don't touch that. And then it was just, I mean, ultimately it helped that the asset went up a lot in value as well. But just the
Yep.
idea of like it's hard to get it out of there and just like protecting yourself from yourself,
Hmm.
what I found.
Yeah, and you find that a lot of people in the sales space in general, I don't know why, but it is true. They love to take what they have and just put it out there, right? Spend that money, buy that thing, do the next activity. It's cultural almost in the sales space to do that. So having the discipline to live a little differently than that is critical to long-term success and stability.
Why do you think that is in the sales space that you see the people wanting to buy that thing or spend the money right away?
Man, there's a glorification of people that buy the, Lambos and the, pay for the yachts and do all that. So I think that's part of it is trying to live up to a specific lifestyle. The other piece, though, realistically, is that nobody's taught how to use money. Really, nobody. And the majority of the population is forced to be at least somewhat responsible because they have to live paycheck to paycheck. And it's always the same amount, but it's going to be at certain intervals, right? It just is what it is. But salespeople have this opportunity to create their own income, which is a massive blessing and potentially a curse, right? And when you do create a lot, you feel like I've earned it. Now I get to spend it, right? There's this like freedom and like, man, if I could do it once, I could do it again. I'm just going to go have my fun and live my life. And then when those dry months come, right, that money doesn't come back. It creates this massive headache. Um, and that headache isn't talked about a lot. You don't hear that in the sales courses, you don't hear that in the entrepreneurial, hype videos. But when you talk to guys who have made it, 8, 9 figure guys who have gone through that come up and grind, they talk about it. They'll tell you all about those low points for themselves and how they had to adjust as they grew and built and became something totally different. So I think that's a kind of an interesting piece.
Yeah, it's well, the guru doesn't want to tell you about the bad months, of course, for its marketing, right? The guy who lives in Miami and buys a nice car and the watch or talks about going to Dubai or whatever the case is, they're showing all the benefits without the downsides. Um, but
Well,
yeah,
if
it's
you're in our space very long, you learn very quickly that even the gurus don't live the life the gurus pretend to live.
oh, absolutely. I mean, you just see that more and more, and it's like I'm curious what your understanding of or what experience you've had with energy because I've noticed
Mm.
like I recently bought a crypto mastermind and I was deciding between two and one of them I could just tell the energy level was lower. It was more like fear of missing out, like hurry and get into this, and the other was like actually providing value. So I'm curious like how you've noticed that, whether it's a sales interaction or somebody's online posts or just even in person.
Man, energy's huge. Like there's so many examples I can give you. In a sales space, like on a sales call, energy is critical, in terms of a successful sales conversation, right? Because some people allow themselves to get impacted by external forces, motivations, issues, and it really kills their energy. And then they're not able to communicate effectively their offer, what they're able to accomplish with, the prospect. And then they don't buy, right? And you'll see when a salesperson's on an insane momentum swing, when they're just crushing it, you're going to see that their whole body vibe energy shifts. They almost lean forward more. They almost have an expectation of, collaboration and success. And that energy shift brings the success they're expecting, right? And it's amazing because as they have a shift in the other direction, the energy wanes, they have an expectation of failure, and they bring about that result as a result of that expectation of failure, that lower energy. So I think that's massive when it comes to the sales space. But when it comes to gurus and things, I can tell you, I've worked for multiple gurus in the exact same competitive space before, and two people had wildly different energies, wildly different vibes. One of them was just so clearly self-centered. Nothing mattered but their own outcomes, their own success. Um, so much so that they did not deliver what they promised to their actual clients. Now, that was obviously not projected forward to their prospects, but to their clients, they were not even delivering what they promised because everything was about them. The other person in that same space had an energy of gratitude and giving. And it was like it permeated everything they did, every communication point they had with me internally, with those externally. And what's wild is I saw that guy's success massively eclipse the other person's because his energy was so authentic, right? That when people did have a conversation with him and he worked with them, they were blown away. They were really struck by that aura, the energy. And ultimately, I think, you see the massive success he ended up having, and it's almost clear, like, of course he did, right? He carried that energy with him and it built that momentum for him in the business.
There's a verse. I don't know if it's I don't know where it is, but as a man thinketh, so is he. And there's a book that's written extrapolates that whole concept. Have you read that book?
Spectacular. Yes.
Yeah, it's exactly what you're talking about as far as
Yes.
like of course you get what you are in the end and it's everything is self-created. It's really interesting that you see the short term like it's easy to take the shortcut or to be the self-centered person, but then like in the long run you will be exposed or you just won't get any word of mouth or referrals or anything like that. Whereas I imagine this other guy that you're talking about who was very giving and grateful, he probably had a lot of referrals, word of mouth, and things like that come to him.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, exactly.
Incredible. So when you're meeting someone or talking to someone, do you pick up on their like energy or their vibe or whatever you want to call it? Do you pick up on it like instantly or does it take a little bit of time or
I think that's something you can develop, and I have developed that over the course of 20 something years doing sales calls. And you get you get really good at picking up somebody's vibe and energy. And you actually can tell a lot about somebody I mean, all the way down to demographic information from a simple hello, right? A basic, how are you doing? And it's just wild how much you can tell about somebody that fast when you've developed that skill set, honed that, you know, whatever it is. But yeah, you absolutely have those energy receptors, right? And you know what's coming in, and you know typically as a result of that, how you need to present your own in order to, work together towards the ultimate solution you're trying to get to.
Were you talking about this on a podcast? Like it would have been like 4 years ago about being able to just on a phone call based on their hello, be able to know what car they drove, like all the way down
Yes.
to yes.
Yeah, man, for sure. Yeah,
I
we got really crazy good at it.
yeah, it's so interesting that you like everything lines up. You know, they say like don't judge a book by its cover or whatever, but it's like it's everybody does judge people, and it's so I think it's a shortcut or um, pattern recognition.
I listen, when I was managing a team at Geico, um, I told them if you're not using your pattern recognition to sell more, you're cutting yourself short of one of the best tools you have because you can figure out what people value based on who they are. And you can present your offer, in that case, it was car insurance, based on what they value, right? You don't just pitch everybody the same rubber stamped offer. Instead, you pitch them what they actually care about. And if you do that, you're going to improve your result. But you can only do that if you pay attention to who they are right at the beginning, because you have to be able to present the entire offer from the beginning as if it's exactly what they want and need. But yeah, stereotyping is definitely a shortcut to sales success.
Interesting. So on that note, when you were like managing people, did you teach them and tell them how when you genuinely care about the other person, they can feel that as well and they notice?
Yeah, absolutely. Authenticity, right? It's something I absolutely believe in. And you mentioned it at the beginning. It's something that you noticed about me, and I appreciate that. Because for me, I think that that's the most impactful piece of any conversation is the authenticity. We have these receptors as human beings to figure out when something's inauthentic. It just feels off. It feels fake, right? Something doesn't feel right about it. And if we can present ourselves as the most authentic version of ourselves and authentically care about the person we're trying to help on the phone, what happens is there's a collaboration instead of, a battle on the call. And we're both working towards the same end. And if we can do that, I talk about friction when I teach people sales. We reduce the friction, in the process and allows them to move much easier from the beginning to the end of the process and get that deal done.
Yeah, that's your is your offer positioned right now at low friction sales? Something like that?
Yeah,
Incredible.
exactly.
Incredible.
Yeah.
I like that. It's like the confused prospect doesn't buy, right? When you have too many things in the way or when you make it hard, why would they? So I'm sure there's a lot more to it than just that. Um, what do you know about neurolinguistic programming?
Man, I have just started studying quite a bit. It's something that obviously has been on my radar for a long time, being in a persuasion field. Um, but Scott Adams, Joshua Lysick, obviously Tony Robbins, right, uh, have all pointed out how impactful those things can be. And as a result, I've been studying hypnosis and a little bit of NLP and just, starting to figure out, how we can both improve our communication and sabotage our communication unintentionally when we're not aware of those principles. Yeah.
It's so incredible to me. I first came across it in either the end of 2017 or beginning of 2018. And it's like the most accurate representation of how the world works to me. Like
Yeah.
once you start to notice people deleting, generalizing, or distorting information, and you just see it, and once you see that, you can't unsee it. And
Yeah.
then when you start noticing like how people communicate and what their view of the world, like basically, we just once you understand that reality is not objective and
Mhm.
realize that everybody interprets it differently. It's so impactful. So as far as hypnosis, what have
Yeah.
you I've been really getting into hypnosis lately. I'm actually taking a hypnosis course right now. We just finished week 6 and I've been using hypnosis sessions to like I got a guy to no longer be interested in cigarettes, one session. Um, and I mean, we'll see how long it sticks. I believe it will stick, but we'll see. And then like another guy who was like overeating to now feel good, pushing the plate back and whatnot. So what have you dug into hypnosis so far?
I think we have a mutual friend, John David Haskins, who
Mhm.
really pushed me into studying it. So um, I've been doing a lot of reading, and in general, though, you know, let me back up a step. The first thing that really introduced me to the concepts was Psycho-Cybernetics, the book. And I didn't realize that it was hypnosis initially that was being taught. But after learning hypnosis and going back and looking at the book, you realize that's all he's using, right? Hypnotic techniques. But what that showed me was how I can use that practically, right? What are the tactical steps, not strategic steps? Strategically, I get the concepts. How do I actually put it into play? And a few of the things that I've used and teach my team to use are the visualization techniques, um, allowing self-hypnosis, right? How do you hypnotize yourself to believe you're going to be successful and ultimately accomplish that success? Those have been really powerful because it can help you break those negative momentum cycles, and it can help you mentally prepare to build a new positive cycle, right? So if you're stuck and you go through that visualization self-hypnosis process, you can totally shift your behavior, your course as a result. And I've found that just really powerful when it comes to sales technique and impacting that. Um, but when it comes to like language use and pattern, understanding like suggestive statements and learning how to avoid things that sabotage the meaning, right? And what the brain does and does not understand. That's all part of I think what I'm learning about how that stuff impacts sales. But the biggest thing is stories to me. Stories are little hypnosis sessions. And when you can use stories in your sales process, tell them the right way, they are more powerful than any other aspect of your sales flow because those stories deal with, all the future objections, the worry about will it work? Will it work for me? Do they know what they're talking about? All those things are totally eliminated when you tell the right story and you do it effectively. So for me, that's definitely one of those big factors.
Absolutely. Can you unpack like a story that you have used in the past, what the story was, and then afterwards, what beliefs that story helped reformat?
Let me give you a different, well, yes, but let me tell it through one of my clients. All right. Um, one of my clients came to me with a problem, and that problem was that he was taking an hour and 45 minutes on every single sales call. And his closure was good, it was fine, but he wasn't really, obviously he wasn't efficient, but he also wasn't feeling like he was getting the most impactful parts focused on during the call because it was so long, right? They were all distracted. And so he felt like he was losing opportunities because of that. And so I challenged him. The next time you sell, I don't want you to tell them what you do. I don't want you to walk them through your actual offer at all. Instead, I want you to do a great discovery, find out what their problems and needs are, where they're trying to go, dig deep into that. I want you to then tell them a story about one of your clients who went from that starting point to that finishing point, who was able to overcome the adversity of, struggling to find time, struggling to prioritize it over family, struggling to, figure it out when it comes to work, whatever it is. Connect that prospect to this story and just tell them what happened to Joe Smith when he worked with you and then the outcome they achieved. And I want you to walk them through that. Don't make it too long, honestly, just 5 or 10 sentences. but walk them through that progression that John had with you. And when they're done, they've heard the story. Ask them if they want to make the same changes, if they would like the same outcome. And when they say yes, I want you to ask for their credit card. And he was like, dude, there's no way somebody's going to buy if I don't tell them what I'm going to do. And I was like, give it a shot and let's see what happens. The next day, I get the most energized voice note I've ever heard in my life. Just totally mind blown. And he was like, dude, you're never going to believe what happened. I went through a 30-minute discovery with this guy, got deep, figured out what he needed, told him a story about one of my clients. When I asked him for the money, he said, absolutely. He paid me 3,500 bucks. As soon as the payment cleared, there was like an awkward silence. And he goes, how are we going to do this? What's next? And I was like, dude, there was two massive lessons there for him. One, people don't really care how you get the result as long as you can get it. But two, stories are more powerful than facts when it comes to persuading somebody to work with you. And he was just blown away. And his sales calls definitely shortened up after that.
That's incredible. That's every time I look at a sales process that I'm consulting for, I like trim the pitch. I look at the pitch and I'm like, this is too long. Like
Yeah,
it at most give the three pillars and break down, like customize each pillar to what they need or want. And even then, like you said, they'll buy without even knowing what you do or how you do it, as long as they believe that you can get them the result. And they see themselves in that story that you told, right? As long as you pick the
yes.
relevant testimonial or case study or person that's similar to them. So that's incredible.
Yep.
I love that.
Yep.
I have psycho cybernetics. Just actually, I thought I did. Maybe not. I have reality transurfing over there. I have so many books. I'm better at buying books than I am at reading them or budgeting the time to read them. But
Same.
I have seen the summary, and it seems like we just constantly, if you read a lot of nonfiction, they all say the same thing. They just tell it in a slightly different story, and the principles are all the same. So I want to ask more about visualization for you, and it's a two-part
Yeah,
question. One, have you ever achieved something that you had a negative visualization of, like that you didn't see yourself doing? Because I don't know if I ever have. Um, and then the other question is like how you actually use visualization or what you do actively. Like if you wanted to get better, if you're going to teach me how to get better at visualization, how would you do that?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The first one, achieve something that I didn't see myself accomplishing, essentially.
Yeah. And I can give
I,
you a
I
better example if that's hard to interpret.
sure, yeah. I just
Okay.
want to make sure I'm hitting that on the nose. Yeah.
Yeah, so I used to be really into snowboarding, and I could see myself doing front flips and back flips. Like in my mind's eye, I could see it, and I could do front flips and back flips, but I couldn't see how a 540, like how I would spin that. Actually, I could do 360s, but I couldn't do 540s, and I couldn't see myself physically doing it, and thus I could never do it because I couldn't see. I could see other people doing it, but I couldn't see myself doing it, and then I never made it happen.
I have one example, um, but I think that it may not be a perfect example, but I have an example. When I was first starting out my consulting and coaching business, I knew it was possible, but I couldn't see myself being successful at it. And so, for whatever reason, I just mentally had this block. And I was like, I know I should be able to do it, have the experience, the knowledge. I absolutely should be successful at this, but I don't think it'll work for me, right? I just can't see myself accomplishing those things. To challenge that thought process, he believed I could do it. He could envision that success, and he would tell me what that looked like. Okay. And even though I wasn't creating that vision for myself, I was hearing that vision. And he was telling me what was going to happen. You are going to do this. This will be the outcome. Right. And I was like, dude, I don't believe it. Didn't matter if I believed it or not. Right. I did what he asked me to do. Then the outcome was what he told me it would be. And here's the thing about this. I think there's two really interesting pieces. One, visualization had to happen. at some point, but he had done it for me and communicated that to me. And I was able to absorb that vision, even though it was almost against my will, right? But I was able to accomplish those things he said I could do. But the second thing that happened was that as soon as I did, everything that was chaining me down shattered, right? My understanding of who I was almost shattered. And it was like there was a rebirth, a freedom to understand myself in a new way. That mental block was gone. I've never had it since, right? Because that vision came to reality and it had proven that my default setting was false. And that was a game changer for me.
That's incredible. Wow. So do you think that when he was telling you what was going to happen, like was he future pacing you and were you actually visualizing what he said, which then led to the visualization of you doing it, even though you didn't believe it was possible, but you could actually see it in your mind's eye?
Yeah, I do think so. And I don't know that he was doing it intentionally. Maybe he was, but that was absolutely what was happening, right? The way he was phrasing that, the way that he was asking me to, picture that success. Like, dude, this is what it's gonna look like. These are the numbers that'll be rolling through your Stripe account. And you start seeing them because he's describing them, right? And so you are automatically visualizing what he says. You know, people will say yes, they will pay you, right? You will succeed. Those things will happen because XYZ, right? And you're just seeing that play out as they describe it. He was absolutely future pacing what was going to happen. And, the way he walked me through it was just like, very clear, linear for me. But yeah, that's really interesting. I don't think I've ever thought about it from that perspective, but looking back, like it becomes really clear.
I bet. So now that that block is removed, how do you
Mhm.
use visualization and like how is it part of your, I don't know if I want to say daily routine, but how is it part of your life?
I wish it like I'm not as good about using it as I should be, knowing what I know about it. That makes sense. But um, I have used it before and intentionally for different things. But the way that I do it is I kind of assume that it's going to take me a couple of weeks to be really successful. And I'll start by just kind of calming myself down. And well, let me pause. I'll start by understanding what I want to accomplish, right? What am I really trying to accomplish with this visualization? But then I'll calm myself down, I'll close my eyes, and I'll start picturing myself in the future accomplishing those things, right? Um, what does it look like, feel like? What are the smells around me? Joshua Lysick taught me that, hypnosis is essentially just, the five senses projected, right? So if I can think through, when I'm accomplishing these things, I'm wanting to visualize, what am I experiencing with all of my senses, right? And I just try to live that moment as intensely and realistically as possible in my imagination. And that can take 5 minutes, it could take 20 minutes, right? Now, if it's an outcome focus, it doesn't take quite as long because I'm just looking at maybe a snapshot, a moment in that day where my outcome is as I've hoped, right? But if it's a process I want to adjust or change, right? Maybe it's closing deals. I've been struggling and I need to fix that, right? What that looks like is me going through an entire sales call mentally and imagining every single part of that call goes perfectly
Mm.
and as vivid detail as possible. What is the client saying to me, right? How am I feeling in my seat when I'm having that conversation? Why is that going that way, right? What are they feeling and what am I feeling as this plays out? And I just imagine all of that in as much detail as possible from start to finish. I get to the end and I just kind of let it go, right? And kind of go about my day. But what that does is it gives you the experience as if it had happened for real. Your mind doesn't know the difference. And so when we talk about building momentum, especially when it comes to like sales momentum, the more you experience winning, the more your actions will support that experience, right? You will continue to go in that direction. And so if you're lacking that experience in reality, you can create that experience for yourself with your imagination. and that's the huge value of visualization for me, and a couple of the ways that I've used it.
Incredible. When I was first getting into meditation, the only thing I was obsessed with was rock climbing. And specifically it was climbing El Capitan in Yosemite in a day. And I had the route, like I had gotten pictures of every part of the route, and I had like the little topo, which is like a map of the route. And so I was like doing a guided meditation, but the whole time I was just visualizing myself climbing the route. And then I had heard about visualization, so I visualized myself like standing at the top with my arms up. And it was so easy. Like for it to be a 3,000-foot cliff that we climbed in a day that we didn't know much about, like we did it in a little over 13 hours. And it was like everything went so perfect. And it was just like, to me, is mind blowing to see, okay, well, obviously this stuff works. And I didn't even know what exactly had
Yeah,
caused it at that time, maybe to know that like why this stuff works. Um, but yeah, it works.
I think that's one of the cool things about the tool is that you don't have to understand the mechanism that it uses to work. You just need to do it and you'll see the outcome, and that's really cool.
Okay, so why is this, as well as personal finance, not taught in school?
Man, I, I have a lot of theories about education in general. My dad was a school principal, but honestly, I think that school teaches you to be an employee. School teaches you to be a really good employee. It's all school ever teaches you. It's all it's ever been designed to teach you. And what's funny is like I went to college, got a, degree in marketing, got an MBA, all with the intention of like building businesses one day. But none of that gave me any real direction or experience when it comes to entrepreneurship or building businesses. The first business I started was worth more than all of my education combined. And they won't tell you that. They won't teach you that because that would sort of defeat their purpose, right?
Right.
And so I feel like sales is similar to that because you don't have to have any education whatsoever to go be excellent at sales and to be excellent at what I do. And I've always found that sort of ironic and interesting, but I think it's actually really, you know, uh, it's enabling for everybody on the planet to know that you can be good at this and make real income at it. But also on the education side, there's no incentive to teach it because people could learn it and leave, right? And if they can learn it and leave, there's no reason for them to go teach it, I think. But I think there's potentially a few small programs that do a good job with it. I've seen a couple guys actually on Twitter who are business professors and do a very sales business, but it's rare. And I think, you know, most professors probably don't have a lot of real world experience with those things, business, sales, etc. And those are things I honestly think that you really only can learn by doing them.
100%. I think that university in general is going to be replaced by online courses
100%.
because the people who are teaching them, even if half of them are over-promising, they've still actually done the thing. Whereas, did any of your university professors, had they ever run a business before, or are they just reading out of the textbook?
In my entire business department, when I'm thinking back to my school, one of them had owned and run a business successfully and was essentially retired. That's what he did for fun, be a professor. Everybody else was essentially a lifetime educator, right?
Wow. Yeah, it's, I guess, not surprising, but yeah, that space is, I think, ripe to be disrupted. And as you said before, the incentives are such that if you teach people like personal finance, for example, then they maybe realize that investing in college isn't a good idea. And then, and then they realize, oh, actually becoming a debt slave is not a good idea either. Like going into debt for what I'm promised to make, that doesn't make any sense. And then they maybe rethink what they're going to do. And then the whole system that, what you can't have a teacher who teaches you that you don't need them anymore. It's like asking a barber if you need a haircut.
Yeah. Well, that's why they removed teaching logic from the school system years ago. You know what I mean?
Was
When
that
you teach,
recent?
no, it was a while back, like the 1960s, probably. You teach kids how to think logically, and suddenly they can challenge your BS beliefs.
Incredible. So now I want to talk about, I know you're a dad. I don't know how many kids you have or how old they are.
Yeah.
But now that we're talking about teaching kids, I want to hear how you teach your kids and like what ages they are and what that journey has been like for you.
I have a 14-year-old, a 12-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 3-year-old. And they're all boys, four sons. So that's fun. But yeah, teaching them, I kind of teach them all differently because they're all different in terms of what they want and what they're trying to do. But let me give you kind of an example of my oldest two. I've always told them from the beginning, man, if you want to earn money, you can make it. There's nothing restricting you. You can start now. You can always do something. And they took that to heart, which I think is cool. Both of them sell candy at school and make decent money at it. They're going to the dollar store, buying a bag of candy, selling it, for a 5x markup, and they're doing great. They're just dealing it out of their backpacks. But the 14-year-old, he and I are gonna launch an info product business together. I just bought him a laptop, told him, hey, here's what you need to do, and here's what I'll give you. And he's really pumped because he's gonna learn all the things that he needs to know to run a business. He's going to learn how to do marketing and, you know, all kinds of random stuff, right? Because he's going to help me run it. And in fact, I'm going to have him do the majority of it. I'm really just going to be there to provide ultimately the value of the service, but some direction and guidance. And I told him, with what I can teach people, you can make as much as you want. You just have to figure out how to position that and how you want this offer to look. I said, but I'll work whatever I need to make that a reality, whether that's an information product or group coaching or whatever. I don't care. I'll do it for you, man. And we'll split the revenues. And I showed him how that looks and we're ready to rock. So, he's 14 and literally starting right now to craft his own first business. And I want to encourage that as much as possible. And if he didn't want to do that, that would be okay too. But, I've just told them that, the reality is they're going to be successful. It doesn't matter what it is. And no matter what they choose to do, they're going to have to take those, reins and go run with it and make it happen. So I said, you pick what you want to do. I'll support it, but you're going to crush it no matter what that thing is. And it's been cool to kind of watch that blossom and then kind of start exploring what they're interested in and start kind of testing the waters themselves a little bit.
That's incredible. That's feels like to some my parents instilled the value of work, but also limited me on how much my time was worth. For example, one of my first jobs was mowing a lawn, and I was 11 years old, and I was getting $25, and they're like, $25 an hour, that's too much. You should do an extra hour of work, like pulling weeds or something like that, because that's too much money. Or like when I was a ref for soccer, they're like, that is so much that you're making per hour. And it put the wrong beliefs in my head about the value of my time as opposed to empowering me to think about how can I make my time worth more.
I think that's a critical thing because most people don't realize they're instilling negative belief about finance and money into their children. And it's their own negative belief or negative thinking, but it limits your children's ability to succeed because they have this invisible chain holding them down to whatever that expectation is. And I think that's a big part of what shattered for me when uh, I had that first big month and, the reality of what my coach told me was possible came true. Those kind of limiting beliefs that I grew up with were gone, you know.
That's incredible. Has any of the kids who sell candy, have they come to you with a big learning lesson or a loss or like, hey, I learned that I shouldn't
Oh
do
yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, for sure. The candy stuff, man. One is market research. Like, hey man, you know what I figured out? If I just ask people, what do you want to buy before I go to the store, I sell more of it. I was like, wild, man. That's great. And so he's like figuring out how to do market research, right? And now he's like understanding markets. And he's like, look, my classroom, they're all cheap. He's like, but I learned that the classroom next to me, everybody brings money and everybody buys candy and they're mad because they don't have enough. And I was like, okay, so what are we learning here? He's like, well, if I can figure out how to enter that market, he's like, I'm gonna clean up. I was like, dude, this is so good, man. And like he doesn't realize what he's learning now, but those are things that I didn't learn until I was in my 30s. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, that's incredible. It's like I had seen somebody's tweet saying something about like the drug dealer knows more about business than your economics professor. And it's true
Yes,
because they
yes.
learn things like, not not like when the money needs to come first, for example, or not trusting somebody that like, here, we'll give you the product and then you'll pay me later. And among so many other skills of supply and demand and, you know, buying in bulk and things like that. So that's incredible.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, how about the younger kids? When you're going about, because you're so aware of beliefs and hopefully not instilling limiting beliefs in your kids, how do you navigate? Like, are you very careful with your language and like how you approach a situation, or how do you navigate something like that?
Um, Realistically, man, I'm nowhere near as good as I want to be. But what I've learned, honestly, is like the art of the apology. And if I say something that I recognize later does that, right, instills negative beliefs or even like honestly, even just basic day-to-day parenting, if I just step out of line of what my expectation is of myself, I've learned that apologizing goes a long way, right? And explaining to them like this is what I did, this is what I should have done, this is why it was a problem, and I'm sorry, you know? And it's amazing their reaction to that, even when they're younger. Um, but I think that teaches them a lot about those types of things. But when it comes to like, the young guys, super young, I don't stress it too much. They start to get to middle school and they start to ask the right questions, and I really start to push, the right things. But, before then, it's just comments here and there.
I see. Okay. There was I met a guy here down in Colombia that he's could be retired. I think he sold a business for like 100 million or something like that. And now lives down here in Colombia where things are even cheaper. And I'll have to find what the book series is called, but he wrote like a kids entrepreneurship book series that was like aimed at kids like 8 to 13 or something like that. And it's like the it teaches the kids through stories how business works. And then also I think the program is set up that you like as the parent incentivizes the kid like, hey, if you finish this book, you'll get this much money in an account that then you can eventually use to
Nice.
start your own business.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it seems
I
like
like
an
that.
incredible program to, align the incentives because I figured out as I've learned more and more, just incentives are truly everything, you know?
Yes. I mean, yeah, I agree with you. Incentives, Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell was the most eye-opening book I've ever read on incentives. But ultimately, the lesson is you always get what you incentivize. It's almost impossible to get anything otherwise. And being really cognizant of what are you actually incentivizing is so critical. And if you manage a sales team, that's a piece that sales managers miss a lot is what am I actually incentivizing with my compensation structure, with what I communicate to people? And it's really powerful to rethink all of those pieces through the lens of what am I incentivizing? Is this really the right structure? But anyway, yeah, I agree with you, man. Incentives are critical.
Can you give an example on a sales team? Like you talking like a performance
Absolutely.
incentive that really stretches someone, or what do you mean?
Let me give you an example of something that would be a disaster and then how you could fix it. All right. I once worked with a team who had a bonus structure set up that capped at a certain amount. And what happens is when you have a capped bonus, they're going to delay all their deals after bonus is maxed to the next month because they want that next bonus, right? There's no additional incentive for them to close the deal. But if they can delay that and still get the deal closed 2 weeks later, and they're going to get the bonus, you're incentivizing deals to be delayed. And
Mm.
I've experienced that in previous positions, et cetera, where I've seen those types of things play out. But if instead you remove the cap and you make it a, you know, linear or progressive bonus structure where they're incentivized to continue closing deals, that negative incentive goes away. And all of a sudden, all those deals get closed. And if you know anything about sales, you know time kills all deals. So you actually end up with not just deals occurring sooner than they would have when you're negatively incentivizing, but a higher number of deals in total because some of those deals don't fall off in the waiting.
I've never heard of anybody capping the bonus. That's because it seems so stupid based
In
on the reasons
corporate
that you told me.
spaces, it's a pretty common thing.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
seen one of the, I don't know if you know John Cardis, but one of the things that he taught me was he would have a based on cash collected, like the base commission rate. And then if you
Mhm.
once you get over the hump, like beyond like KPIs here, but once you get not just over KPI, but beyond it, now all of a sudden your commission goes from like 10 to 12. And then so people have that
Incentivized to close even more deals. Yeah.
exactly. And then after that, there's a carrot that's like the top performer will hit it like twice a year or something like that. Something that really stretches them towards that even
Yes.
bigger bonus that's there. And it just makes so much sense. Like, of course, that's going to get people doing the right thing. And so
Yeah.
I learned one of the first sales teams that I managed, we had initially was set up $20 per booked appointment for the setters. And it was like, okay, but what if they no show? So then we were like, why don't we double it and say if they show up, you get paid this much. And then it was like, okay, if they show up and they're qualified. Because then it was
Yeah.
like all of a sudden you're
Yeah.
just booking space on the closer's calendar and it's not
Yes.
helping and they're not showing up. And so it was, and
Yeah.
then I've seen more that are like based on cash collected. And it's like, oh, now the setter's actually incentivized to open the gap and only set good people who are going to
Mhm.
close and they're
Yeah.
going to lean more into that. And so it's just like, I guess you learn all
Absolutely.
this by doing.
Yeah. Right. And you do start to observe, what am I actually incentivizing by learning what are your outcomes, right?
Yes. Yes. So I want to ask you about what your favorite either verses are in the Bible or lessons in the Bible.
Hmm. I'll tell you, I am the worst memorizer of verses, but I've read it several times, front to back, and I love it. I think that zooming out is my favorite way to start with that question. My favorite lesson is that God is unchanging. And it's just such a ridiculously simple but timeless principle. And people miss it when they go from Old Testament to New Testament. That's like two different gods almost to people, right? Um, but if you view it from the perspective that he is the same, always has been and always will be, you start to see the Bible in a totally different way. And the Old Testament actually comes alive in a new way. And for me, that was really kind of life-changing when it came to how I understood the word, man. Um, but a couple things that I enjoy about it, specifics, man. A lot of Christians have a negative view of money. They believe that it's terrible to be rich, right? And using the principle that God is the same and that he loves us, how come he gave Abraham, Isaac, uh, absurd wealth, right? How come all those guys got wealthy, right? How come Job, right, after he went through his trials, was rewarded with wealth, right? It's absurd to think that God thinks that's evil, and yet he would give it to his children. Um, and so for me, that was another big lesson, right? Learning that it's not the wealth that's the problem, right? It's making the wealth a replacement for God. That's the big problem. And when people do that, right, that's where everything falls apart. But if you keep him first and you stay humble, um, the wealth is not a problem, but in fact a tool to be used for his kingdom. And I think that that's just a critical piece that people need to understand, especially in sales and business, where we can achieve ridiculous highs when it comes to wealth. And if we limit ourselves because we believe it's immoral, we're never going to accomplish the things that perhaps God designed us to accomplish. So I think that's a big
Yes. And so I think that people get wrong there's the story, or there's the, I don't know if it's a parable or a story, but it's easier for, or it's harder for a rich man to get into heaven than a camel through the eye of a needle. And so why is that distorted, or what do you think that the real message was
What's
there?
funny to me there is everybody leaves out the last part. With God, all things are possible. It's like,
Ah, there you go.
why ignore that? Why ignore the most critical piece of that story, right? Jesus is telling you, yeah, it's really hard, but God can do anything, right? Like that's not impossible. And man, that's just such a critical like mistake made by people when they just don't understand the full context and they're only told a part, right? Um, but yeah, Jesus had many wealthy friends too, right? He didn't tell them they were going to hell because they had wealth. And I just think that's a really, interesting thing to observe in the word.
Yeah. It's interesting too how unliked tax collectors were, even back in biblical times.
Yeah. Crooks then and now.
Which is perfect as the government is getting audited now. So
Yeah,
it's the more
indeed.
things change, the more they stay the same. That's one of my favorite things to look at is things like that have been the same like all the way back to biblical times. You know, there's certain things like that, professions that have been around. There's like if it's that old, if they're talking about eating bread and drinking wine, then possibly those things aren't really that bad for you, you know, if they're made correctly or whatever the case is. And there's so
Yeah.
many other examples there. So,
Yeah. I
anything else that really sticks out from you as just like wisdom overall from the Bible?
feel like that's an intense question, but
Yeah, I
I
don't
don't
mean
know,
to
man.
put you on the spot and say, come up with three
No,
answers.
no, honestly, like I think that people need to read it. Like that's it. Like people need to read it because it's alive. And people don't understand that statement until they read it, and then they do. It's the word gets to you, and you will see things and learn things reading it that you would not know otherwise. And I think that that's critical for people, and when they get to experience that personally, the world opens up to them, and that's the only wisdom I would have is read it.
Incredible. Yeah, I would. What I've found and what I've noticed is that all paths lead to God. And the way that I say that is for one, in people's personal life, like when people have the hero's journey and hit the despair, that's when they come back to their faith. And you see the pattern a lot in the Bible of like things are going good, so we turn our back on God, and then things go terribly, and then we find God again. You know, it's the success leads to partying, failure leads to contemplating type of mindset. And I've also seen it with people who call themselves atheists and are completely unrealistic or unreligious. Then, when something really bad goes wrong, they're like, oh God, please, oh my God. The first thing they say is, oh my God. And so it's like, huh. So you do believe in God, but only when shit really has hit the fan or when you're really
Yeah.
needing help, that's when you call for him.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
There's a core piece of us that knows, right? To bring back another Joshua Lysick concept, he likes to say like ancestral memories unlocked or something like that. And it's almost like we all know deep down that it's real, right? We know deep down that we have to surrender. And it's still a difficult thing until, you know, we're almost made to do it, circumstantially. And then it's obvious, right? But I agree, all paths lead there ultimately. And it's our decision whether or not we acknowledge it.
Yeah, absolutely. You've mentioned Josh Lysick a couple times. I'm familiar with his name and that he's a ghostwriter, and I think he knows a
Yeah.
little bit about hypnosis, but I don't know much more. So what would you recommend other than just looking at his account?
Yeah, he's got a great book. What's it called? So Good They Call You a Fake. And it is about writing books to be successful. But he's got a bunch of courses and different things. He's pretty spectacular. And honestly, like he's just an amazing dude. I've known him for a long time, and I've appreciated his perspectives. And I've seen his faith journey as he's gone from, he calls it cringe atheist to coming back to the faith. And that's pretty cool to see.
Incredible. Well, I got some research to do there. What if somebody after hearing this conversation would like to connect with you or possibly work with you? First off, who are you serving right now, or who would be the ideal kind of people for your offer?
Yeah, so realistically, I work with a pretty decent range of people, but all in the sales space. So if you close deals and want help doing that better, we can work together. If you manage a team and want that team to be more effective, we can work together. Or if you own an offer and want to put together the right sales system and processes, we can do that together. So any of those things would be great. We can connect on that. You can find me on Twitter at Andrew Strohm, Strohm, or you can email me at Andy@stromconsulting.com.
Beautiful. The low friction sales is probably what they'll see in your name, right?
That's it.
Awesome. Well, do you have any other parting thoughts, or do you have any questions for me before we jump off?
No, man, this has been great. I appreciate it, Jeff. This has been a blast.
Absolutely. Good to have you.